Shrimati Bhakti-Vinod Krishna Nami Namaste Saraswati Gauravani Vacharani Visheshashriya Srila Prabhupada Dhamma Mahotsava Ki Jai. So I'm going to speak just a bit, because who can speak completely about the glories of Mahabhagavata, pure devotee, Srila Prabhupada. So on this day of Srila Prabhupada's appearance, as well as on his Tirobhava day, or disappearance day, which is, according to lunar calendar, usually falls in November, the practice is that we speak on his Leela, his pastimes. So, of course, one can begin with his birth and try to go up through his whole life, but I think that is very rushed. And Srila Prabhupada used to stress that his real life, transcendental life, of course Srila Prabhupada is Nitya Siddha Vaishnava, eternally liberated, but for our instruction he would speak in this way, that his transcendental life began when he met his Guru Maharaj, accepted initiation from him, and finally took sannyas. His taking sannyas was a very, very important step. Because even when he was still in his Purva ashram, Grihastha ashram, he was initiated, he was Vaishnava, he was even preaching. But he did not find that his Grihastha situation was very favorable, because his wife and even his children, as children grew up, they didn't show much interest in Krishna consciousness. They were, you say, de facto Vaishnavas, coming from Bengal. So many families in Bengal, they are in a nominal way devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So they were like that. But Srila Prabhupada, by association with his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhakti-Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, a great fervency, a great desire to serve his spiritual master had come up in his heart. So it so happened that in his Grihastha ashram, his spiritual master used to appear to him in dreams and tell him, now leave everything and come with me, come preach with me. And initially Srila Prabhupada, as he would recount this, he would say that he would wake up from these dreams feeling very shocked, very alarmed, thinking, he could not imagine such a prospect, that he would leave his wife and his children and take the Tridandi and move through the world all alone, just under Krishna's protection. This was initially just unthinkable for him. But he kept having these dreams. And simultaneously, his situation at home became more and more, I think the best word would be sour. Not very pleasant. So, Srila Prabhupada finally went to Vrindavan in the 1950s. And early in the 1960s, he accepted sannyas, and then he began to make his plan. No, actually it was late 50s. He accepted sannyas, and he began in the early 60s to make his plans to fulfill the order of his spiritual master, the first order that he had received from his Guru Maharaj. When he first met him way back in 1922, his spiritual master had seen young Abhay Charan Dey and said that you are educated, because Srila Prabhupada had gone to English schools, and so you are educated, so you should go to the Western countries, English-speaking countries, and preach. That was already in 22. And then when Srila Prabhupada accepted Diksha, initiation, from his Guru Maharaj, that was in 1933, 11 years later. It was a little after that. And it was 3 years later. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was in ill health, and it was expected that he would leave this world. So it was then, 3 years after his initiation, that Srila Prabhupada wrote to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, asking him, what service can I do for you? What can be my service in particular? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati replied only 2 weeks before he left this world, the same instruction, that you should go to the West and preach. So after he took sannyas, it was after he took sannyas that he could actually seriously set his mind and heart on this. And it was very arduous. And this is all recounted in Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. It was very arduous. He first had to publish some books. He was advised by friends that if you want to make an impact, then you should have books. So he was translating and publishing Srimad Bhagavatam, preparing a manuscript for Bhagavad Gita. And at the same time he was producing a Back to Godhead magazine and other such works. And then he was going to Mumbai and trying to get steamship's ticket from Srimati Morarji, who was in charge of the Sindhi Alliance. Finally he was able to do that. He was also able, after long effort, to get passport. In those days, still today, Indian bureaucracy is quite thick, but in those days it was very thick. So it actually took a long time. And when you see Srila Prabhupada's passport photo, it's been published, often people remark that Srila Prabhupada in this picture looks very glacial, very, he seems to be very grave and even forbidding in his visage. When he was asked about that, someone actually asked Srila Prabhupada about that photograph, because it seems, like they were wondering what was Prabhupada's mood when that photo was taken. And Prabhupada said, that was the happiest day of my life. To get my photograph for the passport. It had taken so long for that to come. And so then he got his boarding on the steamship Jaladuta and arrived in New York, Boston and New York in 1965. And first he went to Butler and stayed there for about 6 weeks or so with a friend of his, actually the son of a friend of his, Brij Mohan, and his American wife. And then Prabhupada went to New York, and he was actually almost living on the streets in New York. Not quite, but almost. His residences were changing very often. And he was met with disappointments. He had one boy came to him and seemed to be very serious, and Prabhupada thought that this would be his first disciple, first American disciple. But as it turned out, this boy was still attached to drugs, taking heroin. And one day the boy became crazy. They were sharing, actually Srila Prabhupada was sharing this boy's apartment because Prabhupada had to leave his previous place. And this boy went crazy, so Srila Prabhupada had to leave suddenly. So this was a very great disappointment. But it was from there that Srila Prabhupada got this 26th 2nd Avenue address, which was the first temple of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. It was there. Getting this particular place in the Lower East Side that the whole course of spiritual history of the world began to significantly change. So this place had been called Matchless Gifts. It had that name. Of course, Prabhupada took that name in a different sense. He kept it above there, Matchless Gifts, in the sense that what Prabhupada is giving was unmatched. But actually, the original sense of this name was that this shop only sold matchboxes without matches inside. Very strange product. But they were, I suppose these were artsy, craftsy type people who were painting the matchboxes in a very special way, very decorative motifs or whatever. And so they were considering their matchboxes to be works of art. But the people walking by were not very impressed, and so the place quickly went out of business. To the good fortune of the whole world, that became Srila Prabhupada's first temple. And Prabhupada got this place, and that was a storefront, and then behind in the courtyard there was an apartment, and Srila Prabhupada was staying there. And so here we see Srila Prabhupada's simplicity. Srila Prabhupada was the most formidable spiritual philosopher. He, of course, was knowledgeable in all kinds of shastras, quoting hundreds and hundreds of shlokas. Very powerful scholar and preacher. But his own base was simplicity. Very, very simple. He used to live in his apartment there. His desk was a tin box. In India you get these tin boxes for traveling. So he had a tin box with a saffron cloth over the top and some simple seat behind. And he used to save on everything. He was very scrupulous with seeing everything as Krishna's property. So even when he was writing letters, after sealing the letters up in envelope, he had a little weigh scale so that he would make sure, he would know how much he would have to pay. He would weigh every letter just to make sure that he would not waste money on postage accidentally or be cheated. So this was how frugal he was. And also this simplicity shows through in his ability, although he's such a learned scholar, he had come to a place, to a part of the world where no one knew anything, really. I mean, they had heard about a book called Bhagavad Gita, and maybe had some vague idea of what it was about, but from wrong sources. Never heard the bhakti explanation of Bhagavad Gita. So Srila Prabhupada was a storehouse of Vedic knowledge, but he was speaking to people who had no idea what Vedic knowledge was. So you see, this is one thing that one who's very scholarly, you can see in society, the academicians, the philosophers, university philosophers or professional philosophers, these kind of people who are specialists in some very arcane field. They don't talk to common people, you see, and they talk in their own circle, which is very few, and they talk in this specialized jargon, using big words. But Prabhupada's audience, actually Srila Prabhupada also, he had the opportunity through one Dr. Mishra, who was already in New York before him teaching yoga. So he did have the opportunity to come into contact with some more sophisticated level of New York society. But he didn't find that they were very interested in changing their way of life. But down in the Lower East Side, this was a new social phenomenon, and there was a whole generation of young people who had turned their backs on American materialism. And they were just exploring. They didn't know what the answer to their questions were. They were just open for anything, and taking drugs and experimenting with different lifestyles and going to different teachers. The Lower East Side at that time, as I've heard from a good friend of mine, I'll talk about him more, had blossomed with many, many, many centers of spiritual quest. So different teachers yoga, Buddhism, different kinds of metaphysical movements, little movements or cults had sprung up in the Lower East Side, and so there was a generation of young people was flocking there, and in San Francisco and Haight-Ashbury. This is, of course, what has become known as the hippie movement. But actually, the hippies were only one thread within. It was a much even greater than just the hippie movement, because there were people involved in this who didn't like the hippies at all. They thought they were just a bunch of bums, not serious about anything, just about getting high. So, but anyway, it was all sort of one conglomerate scene, everyone packed together and searching for something. So Prabhupada arrived just at that time and got his 26 Second Avenue Matchless Gifts storefront and began to preach. And so, yes, I was speaking of the simplicity. His ability to render this lofty philosophy, which is originally in Sanskrit language, you see, which is one of the most complex languages in the world, and is also, they even say it's a dead language. I mean, I wouldn't like to say that, but that's often what you hear. Oh, it's a dead language because it's very ancient and not widely spoken anymore. So this is the source material, and Srila Prabhupada is having to speak to people who have no idea of this, no background at all. But Prabhupada was so skillful. This is another aspect of simplicity. He came to Amsterdam in 1967, and Amsterdam was another, in Europe, was a big center of this initial wave of New Age thinking, or whatever we want to call it. Hippie movement, New Age thinking, alternative lifestyle, etc., etc., etc. So when he came to Amsterdam in '67, he had been booked by his early disciples on a television program. And this was a TV program that was hosting rock groups. They would come on stage and play, and it would be broadcast. So the producers and directors involved in this program, they had devised some way of presenting the Hare Krishna movement. So they had this stage, TV stage, and they put a lot of dry ice out there. So there was this low-hanging cloud of dry ice to create a kind of mystical, cloudy effect. And Prabhupada was sitting on a seat maybe this high, and the dry ice came up to this level. So it looked like Prabhupada was just floating on a cloud. And then the devotees were chanting. And so this was what they had proposed for Prabhupada, and he accepted. And the director was insisting, because they're very time conscious, so he's telling the devotees, yes, you can chant. And then Swamiji can speak, but because of time constraints, so many things coming on the program, he has only 1 minute. 1 minute to speak. And so the devotees were quite nervous, Srila Prabhupada, they're only giving you one. Prabhupada said, I can present the whole philosophy in 1 minute. And he did. So this, you see, this was his particular exceptional skill that has set him apart. There are in India, many today. There are different Vaishnava Sampradayas still in strong existence, and they have great scholars, great preachers. But this was what made Prabhupada exceptional. That all that knowledge he could distill and speak it all in 1 minute in such a way that people who are there just interested to see rock groups could understand it and be attracted to it. So that was his very special skill. And another thing that has to be, we have to say, with great emphasis in glorifying Srila Prabhupada, is that he, although he'd come to the West, he was totally unmoved by the Western opulence, the wealth, and also the free and easy living that goes on in the West, which has famously caused spiritual masters who've come from the East there to fall into extreme bad habits. I mean, I'm not here to speak ill of anyone, but I just want to give one example, not naming any names, but there was one guru who also became quite popular in America, a little after Srila Prabhupada. And he established some monastery in Colorado. He was teaching Tibetan Buddhism. And so he had come from Dharamshala, I believe, or Nepal, must have come from one of these two places, where there are Tibetan Buddhists and monasteries. So he'd come from there as a strict Tibetan monk. And after living those years in the United States, he died an alcoholic. He became an alcoholic in America. You see, so there have been many. There was, at the time Prabhupada came, a Bengali Swamiji, not a Vaishnava, but he was a sannyasi when he was teaching in university, and some of Prabhupada's disciples went to see him. This was very early in Prabhupada's mission. This would have been 66 or latest 67. And they found him, and he was dressed in a, ordinary suit and tie, not as a Swamiji at all. And he had nicely combed hair. And he was smoking cigarettes. And so they were telling him about Srila Prabhupada. He is also from Bengal. He's teaching Vaishnavism. And then he was asking, well, what does Swamiji ask you to do in your practice of your yoga? And they were telling him, no meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxication. And he was aghast, he was a Swamiji initiated as a sannyasi. And he was going, oh, your Swamiji is very strict. And they said, yes, but we are chanting Hare Krishna, so this is satisfying our desires from within. We don't need all these things. And he said, well, you're going to have to teach me how to give up these cigarettes. I cannot live without them. But to these kind of influences, Srila Prabhupada was totally unmoved. And also in his dealings with persons who were very high up in the social totem pole, as they say, representing that culture and having money. Prabhupada, he cut to the quick immediately. Like when Albert Brush Ford, who was initiated by Srila Prabhupada as Ambarish Das, he was the grandson of Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company. So he had begun reading Prabhupada's books, and he went to see Srila Prabhupada the first time in Dallas, Texas, in '72. And so he was introduced, he flew in and brought to Srila Prabhupada, brought into Prabhupada's presence, and paid his obeisances. And as he got up from paying his dandavats, he looked at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was looking at him and said, so, you are the grandson of Henry Ford? He said, yes, sure. And then Prabhupada said, where is he now? Tell me with someone like that, grandson of Henry Ford, a personal wealth of $5 million. A spiritual teacher will go, oh, very nice. Bring him a drink. And Prabhupada said, where is your grandfather now? Where is he now? And then he immediately went into the philosophy of, by your karma, after you die, you get a birth. And if your grandfather was engaged in sinful activities, then his birth will not be very nice, despite his having had so much money and being such a famous person. And Prabhupada went right into it like that. First thing. So Prabhupada was not impressed by this. When he met, a little later in '71, when he went back to India to preach there, and then in Mumbai he met Mr. Mafathlal, who was a very, very big industrialist. And Mr. Mafathlal, his son, was a disciple of Chinmayananda, who was an anti-Prabhupada Mayavadi guru. He was not just a Mayavadi, but he was specifically anti-Prabhupada. He used to speak against Prabhupada. So the atmosphere in the house was not all that favorable to Srila Prabhupada, but he was brought there. And especially Mr. Mafathlal's mother was very inclined to Prabhupada. She had the heart of a Vaishnavi. So she liked very much to see Prabhupada's Western disciples chanting Hare Krishna, Prabhupada speaking on Bhagavad Gita, no nonsense philosophy, just what Krishna has said. And Mr. Mafatlaw, and he walked in and was introduced to Prabhupada. Then Prabhupada immediately was speaking to him to engage him in Krishna service. He was not buttering him up in any way. And what he did, I find it so wonderful. He was telling Srila Prabhupada, I've come back from my preaching in the United States. I brought these Western disciples, American disciples with me. But the Indian government, some people in the Indian government think that they're CIA agents. Unfortunately, you see, this was the time of the Vietnam War. And America was not very popular in the Third World because of waging this war. So there was actually some suspicion in the Indian Parliament. It was raised by the leftist side that these American disciples may be CIA agents coming in to spy on us or whatever. So they would not grant long visas for them. Prabhupada wanted them to stay and preach. And Prabhupada specifically turned to one of his disciples, who was an American boy, only 15 years old, some CIA agent. So he was 15 years old and he had come to India. He was very young and sweet looking, very innocent. And he said, see, this boy, he is an associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his previous life. And this is Jai Pataka, his name was Jay at the time. He said, he needs to stay in India. Can you do something? Actually, it turned out that Jai Pataka Maharaj took Indian citizenship, although born in America. So, but Prabhupada was already thinking about this, and he was just tuning right into Mr. Mahatlaw. Can you do something about this? Can you? And then Prabhupada asked him. He said he should stay in America. To stay in India. He needs a way to stay here. So perhaps, sir, you could adopt him. This was how he opened the conversation with Mr. Mahatlaw. Perhaps you could adopt him as your son. So, it's so remarkable. Prabhupada was so unorthodox in his presentation, but these people, this family, came into Prabhupada's hand actually. And even the son, who was at that time disciple of Chimayananda, and used to preach after, when Prabhupada or his disciples were not there, he was always speaking against them and trying to get his parents away from Srila Prabhupada. But finally he also became a devotee in ISKCON. His name is Srinathji. He's a disciple of His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj. So, his Prabhupada was unmoved by people's material positions. He was tuned in to the philosophy and to the mission. And when he would meet these persons, he would go right to the point, just like his spiritual master had done with him on their first meeting. You are educated, so you should go to the West and preach. Here's Prabhupada coming to see him for the first time, and this is what he... So Prabhupada was like that with those who met him. And then Prabhupada was, we say Shakti-Avesh avatar. Shakti-Avesh empowered by Krishna's potency. This is not an exaggeration. The Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Krishna Shakti Vini Nahi Tara Pravartana. And without Krishna's specific Shakti, the Sankirtan movement cannot be spread in this Kali Yuga. So you know who has Krishna Shakti when you see that Sankirtan is being broadcast, that there is an impact in society. And that certainly is there in Srila Prabhupada. No one has had the impact in this world that Srila Prabhupada has had. In terms of getting people of all different races, cultures, languages, national identities to take up the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So certainly, this is a deserved title, Shakti-Avesh Avatar. An eternal associate of Sri Krishna, empowered by Krishna with his potency to come down and preach. But I want to tell a little story that illustrates Srila Prabhupada's power in a whole different way. Because of course we could talk about all these books and so many things that he did in his preaching. But here's another demonstration of Srila Prabhupada's power. And if you know anything about India, and especially Bengal, then you'll be able to appreciate this. I mean, this will be true anywhere in India, but particularly Bengal, where the people are known to be very passionate. And, in great swarms and great crowds, they can suddenly, devastate a whole village if they get agitated enough. And then the next minute they're completely sweet and docile people again. See? So Prabhupada was driving in his car, ambassador car, to the countryside of Bengal. He was not driving, he was in the back seat. And in the front, Gargamuni Swami was driving, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj was sitting next to Gargamuni Swami in the front. And they were talking. They were talking to each other. And Prabhupada in the back said, "Stop talking," because he wanted Gargamuni Swami to pay attention to the road. But again, somehow or other, they started talking. And Gargamuni was distracted for just a moment. And the ambassador car knocked one farmer who was on the side, coming on the side of the road on a bicycle, knocked him down off the side of the road. And he was actually unconscious on the side of the road. And in an instant, the car was surrounded by 100 or 200 Bengali villagers. Now this is a scene. I've been in scenes not that bad, but I know what it's like. I was once when a Congress party politician was killed in Bengal, somewhere between Calcutta and Mayapur, and we were on the way, and he was murdered. And all the Congress party workers came out, they blocked, they have what they call a band, they blocked all the traffic. And our driver, somehow, he was a tricky kind of fellow, so he was weaving through the traffic, and he came right up to the hot zone of this crowd, and he was trying to go through. We weren't telling him to do that, but he was Bengali, and he thought he was doing it. And suddenly our car was surrounded by some very heavy-looking persons, and we just backed up, but it was okay. So these farmers would come, and they'd come with their picks. They have these picks, which they cut. These can be very deadly weapons, and they had the picks on the tires of the car. So Gargamuni attempted to drive off. They would tear the tires apart, and the car would go nowhere. And they were all agitated, and there was their fellow villager laying unconscious on the side of the road. And Prabhupada, he was in the back seat, he rolled down the window and he started talking with them. And he was talking with them and talking, and first they were shouting, but as he was talking they became quieter and quieter, and they were listening. And this went on for 10 minutes. And then Prabhupada turned to Gargamuni and said, "Give them 5 rupees. 5 rupees is nothing." He gave them 5 rupees, and they parted, picks off the tire, and they drove ahead. Now this is, if you know India, this is a miracle. This is like Moses parting the Red Sea or something. This is impossible. But this was Prabhupada's power of presence. You see, and they were all happy. They were all satisfied. 5 rupees, and he was still laying unconscious. He's a sadhu, let him go. Remarkable. And transcendental vision. This is another amazing thing. I want to tell one story. When Prabhupada was visiting San Francisco, I don't think it was the very first time, but it was an early time. Prabhupada arrived in San Francisco at the airport. This would have been 67, 68. And there was a great crowd of persons, as there usually was in those days, to greet Srila Prabhupada. And disciples and many other persons, new devotees, friends of the movement, onlookers, just curious people. So hundreds and hundreds of people were there to see Srila Prabhupada. And one of them was a boy named Greg, who was, you might say a bhakta, although that word had no meaning in that time. An uninitiated devotee, and he didn't look like a devotee really at that time. He was very eager to become Srila Prabhupada's disciple. So he was there, a new person, so he was not in any prominent place. And Prabhupada came out of the plane, the passageway from the plane to the airport terminal, and all these persons were there. Jai Srila Prabhupada, bowing down and having kirtan. And Prabhupada walked through the crowd in a specific direction, right to this boy named Greg. And Prabhupada embraced him and smiled at him and patted him and said something to the effect that I'm glad that you have come been waiting for you. This is the first time that this Greg had ever seen Srila Prabhupada. But of course his heart just flew when Prabhupada embraced him like this. So this Greg, he was initiated a little later by Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada gave him the name Guru Kripa. He became Guru Kripa Swami. Now when you go to Vrindavan and see the Krishna Balaram Mandir, beautiful ISKCON white marble mandir, very magnificent structure, you'll see a plaque on the wall, special thanks, and there's a list of names, a few names of those who contributed money to build the temple. And at the top of the list is the name Guru Kripa Swami. He's no longer an active member of ISKCON, although he's still a devotee. But he was so energized somehow or other that he went to Japan and Hong Kong and these places where there was no ISKCON at all, and he was able to raise colossal amounts of money for the building of a Vaishnava temple in Vrindavan. And Prabhupada knew this, that he would do a service like that just by seeing him in the crowd. Prabhupada walked right up to him, put his arm around him and said, "I've been waiting for you." And I know others who have said the same thing. My godbrother Gaur Hari also. He was living on the Morning Star Farm, which is this farm, a sort of ranch north of San Francisco. And this was in the good old days, 67. So this was a hippie farm. And Prabhupada was invited to come there. And it was a very wild place. This also, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was living there. He was Tom. Krishna Jana Maharaj was there. Mark. They were living in a tree, by the way. A little house in the tree. And Gaur Hari also, he was there. He had a cabbage patch that he was tilling. He used to go out with a hoe in the hot sun. And in those days, you know, it was nothing. If you had to weed your garden and the sun is out, then you just didn't wear any clothes. So he was like that, weeding his garden with a hoe, completely naked. And then Prabhupada was walking by, and he kind of saw Prabhupada, and he smiled and walked up to him in that state. And Prabhupada looked at him and said, "Don't you remember what you're supposed to be doing?" And that struck him. What am I supposed to be doing? And it just went right into his heart. And Prabhupada just walked on. That's all he said. He said, "Don't you remember what you're supposed to be doing?" And then he walked on. And so after that, Gaur Hari, he did not stay on that farm. He went to San Francisco and gradually became a devotee. And also did very nice service for Prabhupada. So there are many such stories like that. Yes. Then Prabhupada was very relentlessly merciful, I want to say. This word relentless means unstoppably merciful. He would give up on no one. And his mercy would manifest not just from his person to that person, but in mysterious ways, long afterwards. So I was saving this to the last. My good friend who I've known for more than 30 years, his name is Prabhupada Das. It's such a wonderful name, which he received in 1976. But he first met Srila Prabhupada in 1966. And when I was a new devotee in Boston in 71 and 72, I used to talk with him. He was not in the temple. He was not initiated at the time. He was running a second-hand store. You know, where they sell more. He used to say junk store, sell junk. He was a hippie and long hair and beard. But he had so many stories to tell about Prabhupada because he had met Prabhupada in the Lower East Side in 1966. And he was living in a flat that overlooked Tompkins Square Park, where Prabhupada had the first kirtan. It was overlooking that park. And he was part of the whole spiritual scene. He knew everything that was going on. And, you know, the Hare Krishna movement was just one thing for him. And he was on he used to call Srila Prabhupada Swamiji, and Prabhupada would call him Lon. At that time his name was Lon Solomon. And Prabhupada knew, this Lon at that time, he was a publisher of an underground newspaper. He knew Allen Ginsberg personally, the famous beatnik poet, used to go visit him at his house. He knew many of the stellar figures of the hippie and beatnik movement of those days. And he was also a known personality himself to some degree. And so once he was given a drug, LSD, but some very potent version of it. His mind was also not so stable at the time. So this knocked him into some state of hallucinatory consciousness, trip they used to call it, that he stayed on for weeks. Usually LSD is over with, the experience is over with in 10 to 12 hours, but he was on it for weeks. Actually, he went into a state of psychosis. And during that time, shortly after he had taken that drug, 2 or 3 days later, he went to the temple to hear a morning class by Srila Prabhupada. And the way he was dressed, it was totally insane. He was wearing one of these thick fur coats, a raccoon coat, long hairs, going right down to his feet, black coat. He said it weighed about 5 kilos. And he had a third eye pasted on his forehead. And he had some wild hat that he was wearing, some big brimmed hat like this. And, completely strange looking. And he was in this, per se, psychotic episode that had been triggered by the drug he had taken. And so he came in through the door of Matchless Gifts. Everyone was settled down and Prabhupada was sitting on the seat to begin the lecture. And Prabhupada saw him just coming in the door, and Prabhupada looked at him and said, "Oh, Lon, you have taken LSD?" This was, about from here to there, to that wall. Prabhupada knew immediately the state of mind he was in. And actually, Lon told me, he answered no, because that LSD trip had been already days before, but now he was in a psychotic state. So he said, "No, Swamiji." He meant to say, not this moment, I haven't taken it. And he didn't add that I'm crazy, but he was. And then he sat down, and Prabhupada gave a lecture, and at the end, as everyone would do, they bowed down. But Lon stood up, and he held out his arms like this. He was looking at Prabhupada. And what he thought he was doing was showing his Vishnu. And Prabhupada saw this, and Prabhupada went like this. So Lon thought this was confirmation that he was some kind of avatar. Later on, he thought about it again when he was in a saner state, and he realized that Prabhupada was offering his obeisances to Maya Devi. Because Maya can put a small soul in such an illusion that they think that they're showing a Vishvarupa, universal form, when they're just standing there in a raccoon coat and a third eye kind of. So it was sometime during this period, he didn't talk to Prabhupada that day, but soon, 1 or 2 days later, he came back to try to discuss with Prabhupada his problems in this psychotic state, because he had left everything. He had left his apartment, his girlfriend, everything. And he was just living in the street. And he was mad. He was thinking that he had some special mission in the world. He was thinking he might be an avatar, an incarnation of God, or a great guru or something. And he was trying to tell Prabhupada about this. And Prabhupada was just listening and shaking his head like this. And then he was coming up to a fever pitch and saying, "I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go. I can't maintain myself, I don't know how to live in this condition." And behind Prabhupada there was, he had his clothes, so there was this type of cloth, this saffron cloth, called a lungi, which a sannyasi wears, and there was a lungi folded up. And so Prabhupada took it, and he stood up and he handed it to Lon. Like, you know, just join us, just take on this cloth, renounce this world that is causing you so much trouble. And Lon, he said his mind went into a mad state, feverish pitch, all kinds of thoughts. What is he trying to do? What is he? And he was backing up, and Prabhupada was coming forward with the cloth, backing up. It was almost like those old films, the Dr. Van Helsing with the crucifix and Dracula going. So he was backing up, totally psychotic, out the door. And so he was backing down the stairs, looking at Prabhupada in his apartment. And then as Prabhupada was looking at him, he could see he's not going to take this cloth. Then a tear came down Prabhupada's cheek like this. And Prabhupada said, please come back. You see, you can't take this now, but please come back. And it was so deep from within. So, but Lon, you know, he was a madman. He ended up in Bellevue, the mental hospital. And there are more stories. He would come back to the temple, but he was never in a serious state. Like when he came back from Bellevue. In the meantime, in the 2 weeks he was in the madhouse, they had printed this first pamphlet of Srila Prabhupada called "Who is Crazy?" because people, this was the beginning of the Hare Krishna movement, so it was an obvious and common reaction. The American people, never having seen anything like Hare Krishna devotees before, they would go, when they'd meet them on the street, "You're crazy! What are you doing?" I actually remember myself, I went to distribute books in a place called Des Moines, Iowa. And they had never heard of the Hare Krishna movement, although this was some years after the beginning of the movement. And I was on the street also dressed like this with some of Prabhupada's books. And a police car came up right on the side of the street and parked next to me. The two policemen came out. And they had big smiles on their face. One got in front of me, one got at the back. And I knew they were just looking at me. And then they started asking me questions. And finally I understood after a few questions. They were innocent sounding questions, but I understood that they actually thought that I had escaped from a lunatic asylum. And they were trying to find out which one I had run away from, and they were going to take me back. So this type of reaction prompted Srila Prabhupada to print a booklet called "Who is Crazy?" in which he was saying, "We're not crazy, you're crazy." In a philosophical way. He was just pointing out the defects of material life and how absurd it is, and people who accept material existence as real. So there were stacks of these books when Lon returned from Bellevue Hospital to the temple. And he saw them there. So he'd been diagnosed as clinically insane, ambulatory schizophrenic, the psychiatrist had written on his records. So he had managed to get released. And the first thing he sees when he walks in the temple, these stacks of these "Who is Crazy?" pamphlets. And so he thought, oh, this is in my honor. I've been in the madhouse. And in the meantime, the devotees have printed. So again, he was in that, I'm a special person. I was crazy and they printed these books. So he was not able, to take Krishna consciousness seriously. So he moved away from New York. He went out to San Francisco also, but there he took another LSD and again became even more crazy and more worse. Finally thought he would settle down. So he ended up in Boston. Came to Boston, never had lived in that city before, with his new wife. And he had some money and he wanted to start some kind of business. So she was looking in a newspaper and she saw that there was one shop that was ready to be taken over, rented by someone else. They wanted to give up this business. It was a second-hand shop. And so Lon went there to check it out, and he said it was a place in chaos. There was all kinds of old stuff, bird cages and stuffed animals and old children's toys and knickknacks and figurines and all kinds of things, antique stuff, all in disarray. And there were some hippies who were kind of lounging here and there on the old furniture. just, like this in different poses, gazing at the ceiling. And so he came in, and he was looking at every place, at the place, looking at everything in the place. And he was interested. It was a nice location. And he noticed. Now he'd been out of contact with the Hare Krishna movement, with Srila Prabhupada, for a good year or year and a half. Hadn't had any contact at all. And then he's noticed, but you remember, Prabhupada had looked at him, tear coming from his eyes, saying, please come back. So as he was looking around, he noticed there was a sign that said Hare Krishna Temple. And then he saw some of Prabhupada's books, he recognized them. And he turned to the hippies and said, what is this? What's this sign, Hare Krishna Temple, these books? And one of them said, well, man, this place, before we got it, it was the Hare Krishna Temple. They moved over there, a few blocks over. So he took this as a sign. Okay, we have to get this place. So he got this place, and the Hare Krishna Temple was close by, and that's how I got to know him, because I was a very new devotee there. And he used to come and visit, or sometimes I would see him on the street and we would talk. So, even though he had decided to go his own way with his wife and start a business, somehow you could see, like I said last night in the Janmashtami lecture, you leave this temple, Krishna follows you. So Krishna was following him. He got this apartment. Oh yeah, I want to say, as part of the deal, they had a monkey downstairs in the basement. In a cage. This monkey used to jump around. So he named his shop, but he gave the shop a new name. He named it after the monkey. The monkey's name was Zeke. So he named Zeke's Old Time Furniture. So, and when people want to know where Zeke is, he said, oh yeah, just go downstairs and talk to him. They go down there, be a monkey. Bars in the cage. Those were different days. And then he moved to another place, even better, more busy location in Boston, Harvard Square. And he got a much bigger place. It was so big that he and his co-workers, they just used to live in the shop. It was so big. And one night, there was a pizza place nearby. And one night there was loud music coming from the pizza parlor, and they couldn't sleep. Even late at night, and this music was pounding. So they all got up, all the Lon and his wife and the workers, and they went into the pizza place to see what was going on. So what had happened was that the proprietor of the pizza place, the actual owner, he had been called away on emergency. So he somehow got this really freaky character, who was a friend of his, to run the pizza place in his absence. This guy had hair down to like his knees. And he was so spaced out. He knew how to make pizzas, that's why the proprietor called him, but he had no idea about business at all. He was making pizzas and just giving them away for free. The place was crowded. And they were playing, the jukebox was turned all the way up, and then people were having a party. There was just free pizza. I guess this proprietor was not very happy when he came back the next day. 0 sales, but so much pizza. So Lon and his co-workers saw this going on. So then Lon ran and got a guitar from somewhere, and he started playing the guitar and chanting Hare Krishna. And then this guy with hair down to his knees, he became really happy, really ecstatic. And he said, wow, that's great, you chant Hare Krishna, great. He said, where are you staying? He said, well, right now we're just staying in this store, Zeke's, practically next door. He said, well, I've got a place you can come and live. And you can live for free. It's all right rooms in this house, you can just stay for free. So then they went after, he closed up the pizza shop right there, although the sign said open till a few hours later, but he just kicked everyone out and shut it. He wasn't making any money anyways. Locked the door, and he took Lon and these 3-4 other people to this house. And so each was given a room. He said, yeah, you just stay, it's free. So then Lon was put in a room, and when he walked into this room, he saw the Hare Krishna mantra painted all over the walls and the ceiling. And it turned out that a girl had lived in this room before, and she had just joined the temple. So she had been into Krishna consciousness in her own way initially, painting mantra. She was a kind of artist. And so she decorated the room in that way. And he found books and pictures of Krishna. And so again, Krishna was following him, you see. And then later on he found out that actually that house, that very house, Prabhupada had stayed in years before. In the early days in Boston, they had a temple that was so small that there was no place for Prabhupada to stay. So they had gotten that very same house, a room in that house. So he had stayed in a house that was a tirtha because Prabhupada had been in there. He moved in and put in a room which had the Hare Krishna mantra painted all over it. So in this way, step by step, then finally Lon, he became a devotee almost 10 years later. And then, yes, in 76, then 10 years later, he was initiated. And he got this wonderful name, Prabhupada Das. So no more glorious name can one get. And he certainly is Prabhupada Das. So, as I just wanted to give you, in this way, a few glimpses into Srila Prabhupada's glories as not only a great spiritual master, the most powerful Vaishnava preacher that we have seen in this world in hundreds and hundreds of years, but also the personal side, the sweet side. This is what is so compelling about Srila Prabhupada. So now it's 8 o'clock, good time to stop. So I thank you very much for coming. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada.